There'll be those who will be a lot more data driven. So they look at the numbers. They want to base their, not just numbers, but information. They want to base their decision on information that they have. And there'll be those others who go with the gut. And some of that intuition, by the way, is also built on experience and expertise. Huh? So I'm not just saying that it has no relevance, but some of it comes from the fast, thin slicing is what who's talked about that? Malcolm Gladwell talks about. I'm looking at Ashutosh, in Blink, he talks about thin slicing, right? Which is all intuitive decision making, but based on expertise and experience that people have built. So, okay, so threat avoidant, reward seeking, or tactical versus strategic, data driven, or intuitive. Now, when you put these styles together, Hogan has sort of defined 8 different styles of how leaders make decisions. And I don't expect you to remember them, but just for the fun of it, I'm going to go through the 8 of them just to show the difference in how that style plays out. So you have the auditors, and auditors are the people who make very deliberate, data-driven decisions. They're a lot more focused on solving immediate problems, and they are definitely about mitigating risk. So they tend to be threat avoidant. Then you have the surgeons, who are all about expertise. Their decision is very intuitive, their thinking style, but based on experience and expertise. They're also about avoiding risk and threat, life and death situation. And then, of course, they make them pretty quickly, right? And pretty much about here and now, what am I doing? Then you have the promoters. These are the people who are absolutely reward seeking. These are the people who are focused on short-term payoffs, so they tend to be more tactical. And they go play by the gut, seat of the pants kind of thing. Then you have what they call the stock traders. These are the guys who are going to be a lot more analytical, so they'll be a lot more data-driven. They also tend to be very tactical because they're really watching almost daily fluctuations, but they are much, much oriented towards the reward. What's the upside? What's possible? We then have a style of leadership judgment, which is called the investors. And these investors are almost always very strategic and long-term. They do rely on data and information, but they tend to be looking again at the opportunities for development. I mean, for really rewards, not development. Then you have the defense analysts. These are people who are, again, fairly strategic, data-driven, but they tend to avoid threats. So very crafted, data-driven kind of decisions. Then you have the politicians, who are reward-seeking, fairly strategic, fairly intuitive. And finally, you have the chess player, threat-focused, so they want to minimize the threat. They are a lot more strategic, and they also tend to be fairly intuitive because they've built expertise. So this is the decision-making, which is your pre-decision biases that I talked about. And what do I mean by that? Is if a person is able to understand which of these 8 styles they tend to predominantly work with, then they know what they're likely to do, but more importantly, they're likely to also understand what they're not likely to do. Right? And so that's the flexing that we talk about. Now we come to post-decision biases, because when you know that your decision you've made is wrong and you get the information, how do you respond to that? There are 3 very dysfunctional ways in which almost all of us respond. So it's not like, oh, I don't do that. We all do, because that's the human condition. We all get into defensive mode, right? And that's where the dysfunctionality begins to come in. Either we get into shoot the messenger, defensive, or we get into ignoring the message, which is denial mode, or we just nod, Hanji, yes, of course, you're right, but do nothing about it, which is all about, because I don't necessarily trust you, and I don't necessarily believe that I'm wrong, or it's just that my defenses are so up. And these are the dysfunctionalities which, again, if we're able to make someone aware of, the awareness itself helps. I'm certainly not a proponent to say anybody needs to be, no, none of us is God, right? We are going to have these reactions. So I always say to people, this is how we are pre-programmed. The awareness will help us to say, yeah, I do tend to be defensive, and I need to watch out for that. So I'll tell you a funny story. This was a few years ago, and I'd gone to a client, and they said, Pradnya, talk to us a little bit about the judgment assessment. We're thinking of working with it. And I didn't have my glasses, by the way. So I tried to open in my computer, and I said, oh yeah, let me show you a report. And I pulled out a report and I started going through, and I said, oh yeah, and look at this person. They're clearly going to be fairly defensive when the information is provided to them. They're not so much about denial, so they'll take it. And what's nice is this person has genuine engagement. And my client says, by the way, Pradnya, do you see at the bottom whose name there is? I said, no. He says, it's your report. I said, oh, okay, good. I've got the defensive going, but at least I have the genuine engagement, which is my saving grace over there, right in front of the client. But you know, you're tested in the moment. And I would have fallen right there, party, to that whole defensiveness to say, oh, okay. And you just like a deer in the headlight kind of a reaction you have. Again, my point is, if you look at it, if you're aware of it, then you can learn to manage it. But that was one of my, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed kind of a moment, and I wish I had my glasses with me. So this is really the model we're talking about. And then finally, we are able to then say, are we resistant to feedback? Are we neutral about the feedback? Or are we really receptive to feedback? Again, no right or wrong. What we are saying over here is it's human condition. We are pre-programmed, we wired in a certain way, but with awareness, maybe we can understand that and get past it. So I know I went through that real fast because I thought this is where perhaps we might have a few minutes to begin to make it more applicable to each one of you. So let's use the next 10, 12 minutes to see if we can get a little bit there. And I swear I'd put this slide, and slide deck was sent to Esther before I saw the opening. If anybody was there in the plenary in the morning, and Esther opened up saying, she talked a lot about failures and using every failure as a way to move forward, right? And if you look at failure not just as a failure, but as a learning opportunity. And I think that's what Jack Ma is saying here to say, it's fine, you know, past successes may lead to future failure, but if you learn a lesson from every failure, and that's what really we say is judgment about. It's not, if we know that the base rate is 50%, then it can't be only about getting the decision right the first time, right? I'm not minimizing the importance, folks, to get it right the first time. That's not my intent. But I'm saying, if you know that, then isn't our awareness about what might be causing the decisions to go wrong, that's going to be helpful both from a pre as well as a post-decision perspective. And then, of course, Walt Disney talking about times and conditions change so rapidly that we must keep our aim constantly focused on the future. So it's really more about future orientation rather than past analysis, post-mortem analysis of what's gone wrong. So let's first sort of begin to decode information processing. Remember I said some people work with numbers, some people work with data. Here's the first reflection question for all of you, and I think all of you have a piece of paper, either you can write it down there or jot down. See if you can pick one. I think mainly in terms of words, or I think mainly in terms of numbers. I'm deliberate processing both verbal and numerical information, and I rapidly process both verbal and numerical information. See which one applies to you. And I know the answer is to say, it depends, Pradnya, some situations I'm this way. But if you can, like speaking for myself, I actually always feel I'm very deliberate. It takes me a long time. I need time to process. And I'll tell you why that awareness is important. Have you had a moment to reflect? I mean, just like a momentary reflection. So I know it's a crowded slide. I want you to focus on that last row if you can, which is a coaching tip. So what's deliberate decision making? I'll talk to you about that, and then I want you to. So people who are deliberate are people who just really take their time processing verbal and numerical information. Now, if I'm aware of that, the coaching tip is just make sure you have sufficient time, right? Because when you haven't given yourself that time, you're going to get stressed. You're going to get stressed, you're going to run into all the errors that we've been talking to you about. So that's one coaching tip for those who are deliberate. Make sure you have sufficient time. For those who tend to process more words, right? Either take help or take the time to process data and numerical information. I don't function without my Excel because I really don't do that well with numbers. So my Excel is needed, and I need some people on my team who are smarter than me in terms of analyzing numbers. So I take help both from tools as well as from people, right? So Then there are those who are very quantitative, and they really can, zip through numbers, large numbers very fast. But remember, not all information is there in the numbers. So sometimes, and especially when we work with tech leaders, they just don't spend enough time reading things. And that, if you are more the quantitative processor, coaching tip for you, are you spending time doing the reading? Are you taking in information which is non-numerical? All in the area of how do you complement yourself. Now there are those who are just really super fast, and I have huge admiration for them. I love being around those people, although sometimes I feel fairly dumb when I'm around them, but that's my issue to manage, not theirs. But if you are one of those fast processors, do slow down occasionally, because maybe other people around you are not keeping up with you. And maybe they, like me, are feeling really dumb and may not be contributing enough. And perhaps there is some awareness to that, even in terms of knowing where you are and therefore how you're engaging with other people. Remember, I'm talking about judgment and decision in the context of leading others and creating followership and also getting the decisions right. So here are some coaching tips. Make sense? Did that resonate with some of you? The coaching tips? So just be thinking, how do I process information? Is it verbal? Is it quantitative? Am I deliberate? Do I need my time? Am I super fast? So am I rushing through things? And what might be some coaching that I can do, a tip for me? And sometimes when we work with groups, we just plot the numbers, and this can easily get converted into percents. You'll see I've shown both kinds of graphs. Sometimes I've shown numbers. Because again, when we work with teams, sometimes it's more interest to see the actual numbers because there are real people there. Sometimes you're working with larger groups, some percentages are something. But these are, again, some information. Now, if you look at this group, what's going to be their biggest challenge? They're all pretty versatile, fast thinkers, right? What are they not going to pay attention to? Qualitative information. Yeah. Finer details might be missed out for them, absolutely. So that's just something for the team to, the marketing and the HR folks on these team will have to take especially more do more work to get people, because HR marketing, again, gross generalization, but we deal more with words, and that's something that we're going to have to really work to get their mind share on. That could also be a tip for this team. Yeah. Wouldn't that be interesting to put a team like this to even dig deeper to say, well, what are your unconscious biases? If this is how you're processing information, and something like that could come out to say, numbers tell more of the story, if not all of the story. And so some of those details could be missed out. Let's look at decision-making approach, right? Again, what I want you to do is I'm going to take you directly to the reflection question. I've given you 2 pairs. So in each pair, pick the one bullet that you think is most descriptive of you. So in the first is I'm mainly threat avoidant or reward seeking. Decide which one you are. The next one is I'm mostly tactical or strategic. Am I more intuitive and am I more data driven? So I want you to capture 3 words and write them down for you. You've had a minute? Yeah, got it? So once again, I'll describe what each means, but I want you to then focus on the coaching tip. So as we said, threat avoidant people tend to get overly focused on what can possibly go wrong. And reward seeking, in a shorthand, tend to get far more focused on what can possibly go right and the opportunities. And while each of them has that as a strength, there is a watch out, which is if you're threat avoidant, know when you're being overcautious. And if you're extremely reward seeking, then do surface and think through some of the potential challenges and the risks that may be involved. Otherwise, you may come across as overly optimistic, possibly even naive, right? You lay yourself open to that kind of criticism, apart from the fact that you might make a decision without fully thinking through things. Then when you come to tactical, as we said, tactical people are more the here and now people. And really, they don't want to be messing too much with the blue sky thinking and all that. And you need tactical thinkers because they help you get from point A to point B. The strategic thinkers are the ones who are really more the bigger picture, what's the longer term vision. Again, if you're very tactical, do think about what do I need to do in the midterm? What do I need to do longer term? And if you're more the longer term, bigger picture thinker, do spend time to think about what's the here and now. What do I need to do differently? What are the immediate tactical issues? Yes, you want to build a cathedral, but where is the stone? And where are the people? And where is the labor and all of that, right? So again, complement your styles with the opposite in a way. Or at least know where you're likely to trip. And also own your strengths. So know what you're contributing with. Data-driven people will focus on the numbers. They want the information. A coaching tip for them is don't dismiss your instincts. Your instincts perhaps have been built based on your experience and expertise. Numbers don't always tell all of the story, right? But then there are intuitive decision makers who might benefit from bringing at least some numbers and some data and some rationalization in their decision making. So again, knowing which is my pre-decision bias helps me overcome the bias. Right? And moving forward, just again a quick from our interest of deepening the understanding, I'm going to throw some scenarios and ask you which style do you think will work, because not only is it knowing who I am, now I need to know what style do I need to bring given the situation that we are in, right? So if the situation is, what approach would be beneficial for making decisions where careful, rational analysis and patience is required in order to win big over the long term? Should it be threat avoidant or reward seeking? Okay. Is it tactical or strategic? And is it intuitive or data driven? Didn't get quite. Yeah. Actually, it's all about reward seeking because you're talking about winning big rather than avoiding failure. And it is about strategic and it is about being sort of that data driven because it's about rational analysis. Let's see if I've got my circles aligned in the next one. Which approach would be beneficial for making pragmatic decisions, right? Quickly and to maximize wins or opportunities. So it's threat avoidant or reward seeking? Okay. Maximizing wins or opportunities would be what? Reward seeking, likely to be more reward. Again, we're not talking about, we're saying what style would help you more in these kinds of situations, right? Slightly different from who I am, what I tend to do, to what might be the appropriate style that might help me. Pragmatic decisions, so tactical or strategic? Tactical. And quickly, intuitive, right? Okay, 2 seconds or 2 minutes? 2 seconds or 2 minutes? Thank you. And finally, which approach would be beneficial for making pragmatic decisions? Oh, I think we looked through that, Maxine. Yeah, sorry. I can't go back. So, would be beneficial that require careful analysis of long-term threats and potential consequences. So, clearly we are focused on analysis of threats, so that's threat avoidant. It is longer term, so maybe more bringing more strategic thinking and also more data-driven because you do want some careful analysis. So again, what we're saying is let's look at the decision. What is it going to require? And then who am I, and then what is the opposite style I want to bring? So again, you have some sample results. And then reaction to feedback, I'm going to go through this real quick. Essentially, what we are talking about over here is this is the model of how it works in an application. If you can get people to understand how they make decisions and get them to understand what's their openness to feedback, now you've got them preparing to make decisions and judgment in the longer term. And so, quick poll question, I know I'm out of time, is, but do you help your leaders improve their judgment in decision making? Some of you do and some of you don't, right? Some of you have very specific decision and judgment courses and some of you don't. If you do get interested in doing some of that work, especially with your executive leadership teams, then you may want to consider looking at the Hogan Judgment Report. The model, as I said, is general, it's understanding, but there is a way you can measure the elements in a very statistically valid and reliable way, which is through the judgment report. So in summary, leadership does involve decision making. Our reputations are based on how we decide. All our decisions are biased in a fairly systematic way. If we can understand our pre and post decision biases, we can improve judgment, right? And so with that, I thank you very much for being here.